we are gathered here today to learn and to discuss and to reflect on and to remember a very tragic event in Korean history, the single biggest peacetime massacre of civilians that took place on Jeju Island some 75 years ago. This is a little known history, unfortunately, even in South Korea, for various reasons. The history has been distorted, facts have been distorted by various people, and there are many misperceptions still about the basic facts of this tragedy. Some of you know, many of you know that Jeju Island is a very attractive place, a beautiful, spectacularly beautiful island, a favorite destination for tourists, for honeymooners, and so on. But very few people know of the bloody past and the specters of tens of thousands of victims, including women and children, who were indiscriminately tortured and killed by government forces, and the still yet to be resolved issue of establishing the truth, establishing the facts, questioning accountability, and compensating the victims and their families. In short, the issue still rages on in South Korean politics as a controversy, and it remains very much still unresolved. The trigger to the government's use of cruel and disproportionate force against these civilians, Jeju residents, was an armed uprising by some 350 pro-North Korea, by some 350 members of the Workers' Party of South Korea, who, having been frustrated with the United States military army, the US Army military government in Korea, its policies for several years, staged an insurrection attacking several police stations across Jeju Island in the early morning hours of April 3rd, 1948. Only about 20 or 30 of the rebels were armed with firearms, but the rest were armed with whatever they could find. The uprising was quickly put down by the reinforcement of the police, constabulary, and government forces from the mainland. But in the course of cracking down on the rebels, the authorities came to paint the entire island, the residents of Jeju, as communists. And in the name of quelling communism, for the next several years, brutality, indiscriminate killing raged on. The most intense period of the crackdown was from late 1948, from October 1948 to March 1949. I mentioned the history, I mentioned the period to make the following point. The Republic of Korea, the formal name for South Korea, was established on August 15th, 1948. Before that, the United States military government was in full control of South Korea, including Jeju Island. The United States military governed Korea in the post-1945, post-World War II years for 3 years, and under UN-supervised general election in South Korea only in May 1948, the Republic of Korea was established in due course with establishment of a parliament and the formal promulgation of the Republic of Korea on August 15th, 1948. Soon thereafter, Syngman Rhee, the first president of South Korea, and General John Hodge, the commander of the US military in Korea, agreed to still defer to the United States when it came to the question of operational control of South Korea's military and constabulary. It was a mutual agreement, and that agreement was in effect until the United States withdrew most of its troops from South Korea in June 1949. So the US had full de jure, de facto operational control of South Korea's military from August 15, 1948 until the end of June 1949. And it was during this period that the most intense brutality occurred, from October 1948 to March 1949. In December, you had over 2,000 people killed, December 1948. In January, almost 3,000 people in a single month, and so on. What kinds of people? Mostly ordinary folks, residents, women too. Over 3,000 women were killed. Over 800 children under the age of 10 were victimized as well. And for the next almost 40 years, it became a taboo heresy to question, to bring up the incident in schools, in politics, in the classroom, in society. The incident was strictly censored, and anyone bold enough to question the authorities, to ask questions, would be discriminated against systematically, and their family members, and even their children were barred from working for the government for the next several decades. And this kind of self-censorship and enforced censorship throughout South Korea for the next 4 decades allowed for the United States to also remain silent on its own culpability, its own role in having supervised this unspeakable crackdown on innocent civilians. In the 2000s, there had been some progress, much progress. The Special Act law was passed to conduct fact-finding missions, which led to a very detailed, comprehensive report. Much more fact-finding still needs to be conducted. But this led to the President of Korea, President Roh Moo-hyun, issuing an official apology to the victims and their families, survivors. And in 2021, an amendment to this special law was passed, which allowed for the government to directly compensate, offer monetary compensation to the victims and their survivors. So there's been progress on this issue, but the issue still remains, on multiple levels, still unresolved. Years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the Jeju Peace Park, where many of the victims remain interred. And there are tens of thousands of monuments, tablets, and many of them are unnamed. And in the grand rows and columns of these unnamed victims, one can almost feel the solemnity, the seriousness, and the prolonged pain and scars of the victims due to years of censorship, the enforced silence that they've endured. The United States, I think, owes the people of Jeju and the South Korean people, at the very least, an acknowledgement, a statement of contrition and sympathy. I think that would go a long way toward really further strengthening the alliance between the two nations, the United States and South Korea. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the signing of the Mutual Defense Treaty between the US and South Korea. It's a momentous occasion. President Yoon Sung-Yeol will visit President Biden later this month and have a summit meeting. It will be on a state visit. There will be a state dinner as well. I think at a moment like this, a gesture by US government officials, perhaps a Congress, somebody, a member of Congress, or perhaps even the US ambassador in South Korea, to pay respects to the victims by visiting the Jeju Peace Park would go a long way to healing the wounds of the victims and their families and further strengthening the alliance. President Obama, you might recall, in May 2016, on a visit to Japan, with the then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, they together visited the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. And President Obama said during that visit that memory is essential, remembering. Memory allows us to fight complacency. Memory fuels our righteous indignation. Memory allows us to change. And although the visit was somewhat controversial even at home, I think history will, if it has not already, I think history has judged President Obama's visit and his show of sympathy and respect as morally good and just. In 1908, the US Congress passed a bill to appropriate more than half of the $28 million received from Qing China, from the Qing dynasty, for the so-called Boxer Uprising, which was a violent uprising directed against foreigners in China in the name of nationalism and xenophobia in China. Being weak, was forced to pay compensation, reparations to several countries, including the United States. But in 1908, Congress passed a law allowing for about half of the huge sum that the United States had received from China to use that to fund students from China who wanted to study in the United States as a scholarship fund. I think that was the right decision, and I would think many people today would consider, without much difficulty, without much internal debate, they would consider that gesture, that action to be moral, good, and just. So my modest proposal is for the United States to look into this issue, to remember, to express sympathy, show some contrition, pay respects to the victims by visiting the Jeju Peace Park, and perhaps even one day Congress comes out with a new bill which would allow for Jeju residents, for the victims, for the progeny of the victims to perhaps come and study in the United States on government scholarship. Of course, all this will take much time. Resolving a difficult, a painful issue like the Jeju massacre cannot be achieved overnight. But I feel optimistic we're moving in that direction. I think the US Embassy in South Korea is considering a visit by the ambassador to Jeju Island, to the Jeju Peace Park. So there is some hope that we are making progress and on a path together toward building a better future and really reconciling the pain of the past. So there is hope, I think, but it will take all of your support and interest in resolving the conflict, the pain, the guilt, the anguish, the anger of so many victims and their family members. So thank you for being here with us today. If you have any questions, maybe over the course of the next 2 or 3 minutes, I would be more than pleased to try to address them. If not, it's okay too. Okay, next I'd like to invite my excellent student, Do-Young Chung, to make some brief remarks.
Good evening, everyone. It is my true honor to be on this stage where we commemorate the Jeju earthquake. I went to a high school in Jeju. Therefore, my affection and interest in the well-being of Jeju has always been deep and special. Jeju, a special self-governing province of South Korea, is famously known resort island, with numerous beach resorts, volcanic landscapes, not to mention its amazing hiking trails, The island attracts more than 100,000 tourists per month, famously representing the core of the South Korean tourism industry today. However, while we enjoy the scenic values of Jeju, we often, including South Koreans, neglect the painful history that Jeju has went through, and that is the Jeju April 3rd incident. Up until today, only 2 presidents of South Korea has attended the Jeju April 3rd commemoration ceremony, former President Roh Moo-hyun and Moon Jae-in. Surprisingly, then President-elect Yoon Sung-yeol also joined the commemoration last year and shared his will to restore the honor of the victims and their families. The government's apology and consolation for the inhumane sacrifice are vital to heal the wounds of the bereaved and those who are affected from this massacre. Yoon's commemoration speech and his remark that, quote, "It is the natural duty of a liberal democracy that pursues the universal values of freedom and human rights to warmly care for and share the pain of innocent victims with the people," end quote, certainly carries a similar view that puts the government's responsibility high to cure its wrongdoing and illegitimate suppression of Jeju people. Yet unlike Yoon's wish, victims and their families of Jeju April 3rd still live under the shadow of discrimination and hate. Soon after the Korean War, Jeju was stigmatized as a red island, an island that opposes the values of freedom and democracy. The absence of other presidents, primarily conservative, in the commemoration event was due to the political concerns that the positive recognition of the victims would be potentially viewed as a recognition of the uprising led by the Workers' Party of South Korea. Hatred today classifies the segment of the social community as a group that is incohesive and that is different to the majority of the society. It sets exclusive social boundaries and putting minorities under prejudice and hate. This type of vicious cycle is still prevailing concerning the Jeju April 3rd. Victims and their families are labeled as descendants of commies by the right extremists and are forced to live under unjustified discrimination. Such extremism is arguably what drives the confrontation within the South Korean community and causes division of South Korea, a country that is part of the peninsula that is already divided into North and South. South Korea, as a responsible and moral nation, should remember the victims of the Jeju April 3rd. One must not forget that innocent people and groups of people were sacrificed because of the wrong decisions made by the central government, the military, and the police. They should not be grouped or labeled as a mob or insurgents. Public hatred and discrimination surrounding Jeju April 3rd must be socially restricted and abolished. A societal effort is required to prevent the mass spread of false and misleading comments denouncing Jeju's dignity and those who lost their loved ones and livelihood during the painful 7 years of massacre. Then President Yoon's attendance at the Jeju April 3rd memorial event presumably stemmed from his desire to unite the people of South Korea. For a realization of true national unity, however, self-reflection and a proper apology from those who suppressed the people of Jeju should be demanded and should be retrieved. It must be made clear that the perception of hate and abhorrence have no standing whatsoever in this free, democratic, and liberal country. This is the reason why persistent effort made by WALT in Korea is crucial today. The organization founded by Chairman Yang Soo-yeon has been working at the forefront to raise the awareness of Jeju April 3rd in the US society. Last year in April, the organization hosted first ever commemoration of Jeju April 3rd on the US soil. The people of Boston community had a privilege to participate and remember the lost souls of Jeju April 3rd incidents. As Dr. Sung-Yoon Lee, one of the speakers back then in the commemoration, but also today, has said, a proper apology, a state-level apology, should be made by not only the South Korean government, but also the US government to really bring the justice back to the country. It shall be the collective responsibility of those who live today to pay respect and honor the victims of Jeju April 3rd so that a dark history will not repeat today for the current generations and the future. It should not, the history of Jeju April 3rd should not be dismissed. It should not be forgotten, and it should not be ignored. Instead, it should be remembered, reflected, and repeated. Thank you.
Thank you, To-young. If I may just add, I slightly misspoke. The rebels on the morning of April 3rd were members of the South Korean Workers' Party of Korea. Since then, there have been allegations and distortions made claiming claims that the rebels took the direct orders of the Workers' Party of Korea, that is the North Korean Workers' Party, to launch the insurrection. This is unfounded. There is no evidence whatsoever that there was any kind of line of communication or any order issued by Pyongyang to the rebels themselves. Yet, this is one of the enduring myths in an attempt, I think, well, as a product, as an outcome of ignorance, that is the apathetic approach to this historical incident. If you spend a few hours, maybe even an hour, looking at sources, it's quite clear there is absolutely no basis, no evidence whatsoever that the rebels were acting upon the behest, the order of the Pyongyang regime. But it's one of the most common myths when it comes to this historical tragedy. And the notion that somehow wholesale scorched earth policy, burning town after town, and killing rampantly women and children and unarmed people, all in the name of quelling a communist uprising. Of course, by the standards of the international community under international law, and even by the standards of those days, there is no way to justify, there is no way to distort that kind of state action, state aggression, state crime, and beautify the killing of thousands of innocent, tens of thousands of innocent civilians. So this is still an ongoing and very painful issue for many residents of Jeju. And we are grateful for the support of the Jeju self-governing autonomous government of Jeju Island. We are also grateful for the Jeju April 3rd Peace Foundation. We are also grateful for the association of the Jeju victims' families in the United States and in South Korea. And we are also grateful to Ms. Yang, Chair of Malden Korea, for raising awareness, as To-young said, in the United States on this very important history that must be remembered in perpetuity. Next, we will have some video remarks, greetings by, as we see in the program, Kim Chang-gon, the chairman of the Association for the April 3rd Victims and Bereaved Families, and then Woo Young-hoon, the governor of Jeju Island, and then Ms. Yang will speak, and then we'll turn to Professor Sung-Yoon Lee, Professor Chun of Boston College, to make some remarks as well. So these are short recorded messages, and the translation you can see in your account here,